Hello and welcome to this episode of Therapist Talks. I'm Myra Khan, the founder of the MCAPN, the Muslim Counsellor and Psychotherapist Network. A link to the website will be included in the description box below. Also, please don't forget to like and subscribe our channel so you don't miss out on any of our latest videos. Joining me today for this episode is Sarah. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thank you.
Well, it's lovely that you're joining us for today's episode. Lots that I want to speak to you about you and your work. But would you like to introduce yourself to our viewers?
Sure. So my name is Sarah. I'm a psychologist. I'm working from Kenya. So I'm actually here right now. I came to the UK to pursue my further studies. So I started in medical biochemistry, but I was actually very interested in neuroscience and in, psychological areas of study. So I quickly moved into psychology, completed my training, and here I am.
Yeah, well, the fact that you're based out in Kenya, so straight away I have kind of questions about what is your experience between training over in the UK, experience of working with clients here, and then working over in Kenya. And also I happen to know that the context in which you're working in Kenya also is in private practice. So just immediately, just with that contrast of training in the UK, starting your clinical experience here, and then moving back to Kenya, are there any differences that you've noticed?
Loads of differences. Yeah, that's a really good question. Loads of differences. I have found over here in Kenya, it's more based on the American kind of I would say training schedules, whereas in the UK it's not very different, but you can notice the slight differences between them. In the UK, it's a bit more, I would say, organized and structured in loads of different ways. But I think there's also differences in culture. There's also differences in like the landscape and the awareness of mental health. So, for example, in the UK, I found that there's a lot of awareness. And so people coming into, the system are more likely to have a general background or knowledge of mental health, just because, there's a lot that's going on in terms of research, in terms of events, in terms of just advocacy in the UK. Over here, we're still playing catch up. So there's not a lot of awareness. So people coming in are firstly reluctant, hesitant, and then there's kind of that cultural stigma. There is cultural stigma in the UK, but it's more pronounced here, I have found in my experience. So it's really difficult to get people into the office, so to speak. The other thing I've noticed is that when clients come in, they're coming in with lack of knowledge and lack of awareness of their own mental health. So you're kind of working with a blanker slate than you would ordinarily, which in the UK, they've a lot of the clients, as I said, they're aware of what's happening. So there's a level of self-awareness. There's a level of mental health awareness. That's the main difference that I have found.
Yeah, I can, when you're describing that, I can kind of feel that clients then that are coming to you are perhaps coming with a lack of knowledge about mental health, but then also perhaps with the added stigma and taboos around mental health, which sets them up then perhaps for being perhaps a bit more reluctant, a bit more hesitant, a bit more wary of coming for therapy than in the UK.
Yeah, and it does take a while for them to warm up as well. Whereas I found with UK clients, it does not take a long time to warm up, at all. That it was kind of natural, it flew in. But here I do spend that first 1 or 2 sessions just building up the comfort, psychoeducating them on what a safe space is, because there's a lack of safe spaces here. So it does take a bit longer.
Yeah. So it feels like the first few sessions with you is perhaps more of that awareness work, the psychoeducation, as you said. So you're kind of doing like a dual role in a way. The first few sessions are about helping clients to understand actually what therapy is, what mental health is, which ordinarily would take place in spaces pre-therapy, but you're kind of doing them at the beginning of therapy with them.
Yeah. So if you're like working from a place of lack of awareness, or if you don't really understand a lot about mental health, then I found that's something that you can ask of your therapist, to try and say, okay, well, my knowledge of it is zero. I don't know what this is. I'm coming from, a place of not really understanding what it is. And then building that up in the sessions. It takes a bit longer, but you eventually get there and you do get to the therapy work. I sometimes have clients dropping off before they get to the therapy work. So like they have an understanding, and then it takes some time to process it. And because we're not used to, or maybe they haven't really allowed themselves to create that processing habit, it takes a while. So they'll process a little bit, drop off, come back in, process, drop off, come back in. So it's that's something I found here specifically, but in the UK it's more consistent. So I wouldn't find people usually dropping off or not hearing from them and then they come back.
So there's something around, there's a direct relationship between the level or lack of mental health awareness and how it then is reflected in the actual counselling clinical room, which is over in the UK, because there's greater awareness, clients kind of, once they're in therapy or when they start therapy, because they're more aware of what it is, then I guess they're more ready to commit, they're more ready to actually do the work. Whereas it feels like for clients that you're working with in Kenya, they come at the start, they get an understanding of what it is, and then at that point they make a decision whether to leave and come back later or whether to dive right into it. So there's like an additional kind of filter for them after the psychoeducation part, if they want to continue with you or not.
Yeah, I like that. I like how you framed it as it's a filter. It's something that they need to go through because they haven't been able to go through that on their own. And that just means that I've had to focus a lot on just creating that awareness, doing workshops and webinars and making sure that there's a space to talk about it. There's a space to process that is not in the therapy room. And I think that's very important. That's something that we've nailed in the UK. We're able to do that. There's so many opportunities to sign up for a free workshop and just learn more about mental health. There's so many resources online, which can trickle down here. So I do share the resources that we have. For example, for charities like, Inspirited Minds, the NHS resources, the NHS website is also very helpful, and the Mind website. So I do share those resources here, which in a way, I guess, the digital world does help when it comes to that.
Yeah, it makes it more open and accessible to at least find the resources, even if they're not being generated within the country. People in your communities can still at least access them. It made me also really recognize that when you're sitting there and talking about you have to go out and do workshops and webinars and do more of that raising mental health awareness work, I'm thinking about how much your role then is about the advocacy of therapy and mental health. As much as it is about delivering the therapy, it's also about the advocacy at all and you speaking up about it.
That's something I was kind of nervous about, apprehensive about in the beginning, you could say, because when you're training to be a therapist, you're training to work one-on-one, and then workshop and a webinar, it's one-to-many, and they're looking at you for information. So the roles are slightly adjusted, they're changed, and the dynamics are also changed a little bit. So it took a while to get used to that, but I think from a therapist perspective, I was really able to understand what are the gaps, what are the areas that need to be, focused on, what are the main issues. Specifically here in Kenya, there's certain cultural barriers, and then there's also perceived religious barriers. And I say perceived because it's not a religious barrier, it's something that's perceived to be a barrier. And then there's other things as well in terms of just the social norms. They're slightly different here as well. So for example, I can give an example of suppression. So there's a lot of emotional suppression that we find over here, which kind of starts from a very young age, where people are, or children rather, are not encouraged to express their emotions, or if they express emotions like anger or sadness or frustration, they're kind of told off about it, or punished about it. So there's that kind of idea that I'm not allowed to express my emotions, or if I express certain emotions, I'm not a good person.
Yeah.
And
I'm thinking about that direct correlation then between a child who's been told to suppress their emotions becomes, of course, then an adult that suppresses their emotion. And
exactly.
So the thought of coming to counselling and being invited into a safe space to talk about your emotions feels like a very alien concept then.
Definitely.
Very unfamiliar.
Yeah. And so I have loads of clients from here who, one, don't even understand what emotions are and don't feel safe to even share about them. As a therapist, I can pick it up and tell them, it's okay, let's explore this emotion. But there's that hesitancy, there's that, no, I think I'm okay. I'm not gonna go into that because I've never been there before. And then the other element is losing control, because then they'll feel like my emotions are controlling me. I'm not able to control them, and it's just because it's an alien thing. Like you said, they've never learned how to.
Yeah.
And when you don't process those emotions, or when you don't learn how to manage and regulate them, it kind of trickles down into every single part of your life, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with other people, just, your ability to do things and perform. So it's,
yeah. So there's something here around really sitting with the opportunity to be emotionally attuned to yourself as the client, and then be emotionally regulated by the therapist, and for it to be safe to express those feelings. So there's something in your work then that feels, yes, you've been trained in the UK, but the application of being a therapist in Kenya means that actually your real focus then is on what feels like very early stages of emotional development. It's about, well, let's identify what the feeling is. Let's sit with that feeling. How does it even feel to sit with a feeling? And it feels like those really early stages of an emotionally attuned relationship with you.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that I'm able to help these people just understand that it's okay to feel those emotions. And it's okay to feel uncomfortable or feel distressed when you are working on that emotion, because there are certain emotions. Not every emotion is going to be jolly. Not every emotion is going to be, oh yeah, I'm okay, I'm good, I'm happy. There are some of those that you have to sit with and really struggle with them. But that's part of the process.
I was just thinking about not all emotions feel nice, and so it's the ability to sit with those feelings that feel more uncomfortable, unfamiliar, painful, hurtful feelings, and that actually takes quite a lot of courage then to do that as well, especially if you're then being told from an early age to, no, don't acknowledge your feelings, suppress them.
And if you think about it, sorry, I was just going to say, if you think about it, that's just one of the things, that has the potential to trickle down. And then when you think about all the other, cultural things here, it can feel overwhelming. There can be quite a bit that we need to work on. And so that immediately creates like a barrier to coming into the therapist's office. But I do hope that people can realize, taking that first step and coming in, even with everything feeling overwhelming, even with being told that you're not, ABC, or you will not be able to do ABC. Taking that first step and trying is, I think, what's most important.
Definitely, yeah. So really acknowledging kind of the courage, the courageousness and strength that it takes for people to kind of pick up the phone or email you or walk through your door and into your office. Like, that takes a huge amount of strength and courage to do that. I'm also thinking about, you mentioned earlier about absolutely, Tanner, taking your training from here and applying it in Kenya looks different because of the cultural differences and because of the level of mental health awareness, and that then trickles through into what's kind of showing up in your practice. I'm curious to know, does it show up then perhaps in the type of clients you work with, or in the types of clinical issues, what we call presenting problems, with the issues then that clients bring? Are you noticing that there's any particular commonality or familiar or regular issues that you find yourself working with, and are those then culturally influenced?
There's definitely commonalities. I usually work with clients across different religions, but I prioritize Muslim clients just because I feel like my identity as a Muslim, kind of gives me that understanding, that space of coming from a place of understanding and knowledge of the struggles that you're going through as a Muslim. So I do prioritize Muslim clientele. And with that also comes, its own set of things. I found myself in the beginning working with anxiety, depression, eating disorders, working across ages as well. So not just specifically to one age, but over the years, I think I'm more drawn to working with children, specifically children who are misunderstood or who, are going through a really difficult time. And then I've also been drawn to working with people who have experienced trauma and abuse. And so I'm kind of specializing in trauma right now. And I find those two areas to be the most interesting, just because, one, they're more widespread than I can imagine. I mean, I definitely, coming into the field as a therapist, did not think that they were as widespread as they were. And two, working with all those different presentations that I was earlier on, there was something always linking back to, one, either childhood issues or issues with attachment, relationships with between parent and child. So there was something linking back to there, and there was also something linking back to an experience that was perceived as traumatic, or that was experienced as traumatic. And so that kind of really drew my attention to that area. So while I do work predominantly with, trauma presentations and with children and with things like the inner child, I keep an open mind. One of the first clients I had was for grief. And that's something I think commonality, right? Across the board, people working with grief, especially during COVID. It was so difficult. There was so much loss, and we needed to come together as a community and just be able to process that. I know there are still people who are not processing that grief, who've, shelved it. That's okay as well, because that's something you need to go through. But I hope that one day they are ready to process that, or they're ready to come into the therapist office and say, you know what, I need to talk about this. I need to deal with this.
So some really kind of quite big topics there that you're specializing in, and like you said, and they're big because it's just unfortunately it's because of how widespread they are. So the widespread experience of trauma, abuse, childhood experiences, and then working with children, but equally with adults that are sitting with trauma and abuse potentially because of childhood as well. So that's a real kind of wide ranging group of clients then that you're working with. But as you said, the thread or the commonality that runs through it is this theme around trauma and or abuse.
Yeah, definitely. And there's something to be said for being able to identify that. So a lot of people come into the office with just a few symptoms, that I call surface symptoms, or like if you're thinking about the iceberg theory, the things that are, right above, showing very clearly. But whenever we dig deep into them, it's always coming back to those formative years, those, that first relationship that you have with your primary caregiver, your parents, those experiences you've had as a child. It's always going back to that. And I think that's kind of what's drawn me into this particular area, because there's always going to be something linking back to that. That's who we are. That's how we first came into the world and learned about what is this world and who are these people and how do they live, you know? And it's so easy to forget that when you grow up, that you went through that process. We all went through that process.
Yeah.
And some of it was good, but some of it left a sting, left an impact. And that's something that we have to work on. We have to deal with, because as you said, it's easy to then transfer that, you know, onto another person, onto the future generation, or anywhere else.
Yeah. And I think what you're really highlighting for us here as well is that, and I'm kind of basing this on kind of my clinical experience, which is often people will come to therapy with what we call a here and now present day issue.
Yeah.
Not realizing or underestimating actually the impact of those formative years or the impact of our childhood. And it's only really through therapy do they sit there and realize, oh, actually, the stuff that I'm struggling with or experiencing in the here and now, I'm experiencing it in the way, or I'm struggling with it in this particular way because of my childhood experiences. So it's not that we're saying that if people are coming absolutely for therapy because of stuff that's going on for them now, the stuff that they're going through right now, it might not have anything to do with their past or their childhood, but what will be kind of remnants, or what will be kind of what will be present now is because of their childhood, how they now deal with what they're going through now. So childhood and our formative years will always be informing what we're experiencing right now, even if the thing that we're bringing is not a childhood issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
How we relate.
Yeah, how we relate and how and those scripts that we've written, you know, growing up, they will always impact or inform, as you said, our decision making and how we interact with other people and how we interact with ourselves. Even, you know, the way we talk to ourselves. Negative self-talk is something that I think that's another commonality. You know, that's something I found across the board. I think if I had to say, people call us like a generation of TikTok, I would say we're a generation of negative self-talk. You know, we are constantly unconsciously just rewiring these negative thoughts in our mind, you know, until we believe them. And it's only until I pinpoint and say, hang on, let's explore that particular thought, that particular sentence. Why do you keep saying that to yourself? You know, that's when they realize, oh my God, I actually do that more often than I realize. And I think we all have had those moments where we realize, why am I constantly propagating this negative thought in my mind? Where does it come from?
It's almost like we are verbally self-abusing ourselves in those negative thoughts. And I'm also thinking about the such a lack of self-compassion then that we offer ourselves, because what we're doing is we're metaphorically verbally beating ourselves up. We're being self-punishing, self-defeating. We're being abusive towards ourselves through that negative self-talk. If we could just kind of change focus slightly then, Sarah, and thinking about, based on all of your experience and of being a therapist, to now kind of from a place of hindsight, from a place of having gone through the training in becoming a therapist, based on your experience now, and of course the clients you now work with, the clinical experiences you now have, we often at the network get approached by a lot of people who want to become therapists, that want to train as therapists, and they're often asking for tips, tricks, advice on training. So do you have any tips or advice based on your hindsight, based on your experience of what you would want trainees to know or to at least think about?
Yeah, I think gosh, I could spend a long time giving advice, but I think the two main things I would like to share is, one, don't be scared. Don't be scared that, oh, there are already so many therapists, or if you're getting imposter syndrome, how am I going to be able to do that? Don't listen to that. Don't be scared. You can never have too many therapists, and you'd never know what you're going to be bringing into the field. You could be bringing such a unique experience or, unique point of view to something that's already been researched 100 times over, so you never underestimate your value, because mental health is a constantly changing, evolving, dynamic thing. So let yourself come into that and own that. And the second thing I would say is, don't think it's going to be an easy ride. It's definitely not an easy ride. It's going to, for me personally, it made me address so many things that I had never even considered before, and through my experience, I think working with my own mental health has helped me become a better therapist. So keep an open mind and allow yourself to have those experiences. If you need to do some of your own self-work, do that.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love the idea that you're going, yes, it's going to be about you, and you're going to have to do the work. Yeah. And that might be absolutely starting in personal therapy before you even start your training. But also, what you're kind of really communicating here, Sarah, I think, is don't listen to that negative self-talk that we were speaking about earlier. Yeah, don't listen to that voice. Don't listen to that voice of there's too many people, or it's too hard, or there are already lots of therapists, so what can I bring? And you're going, no, banish those thoughts, really hold on to the uniqueness that you are, and the individual that you are. And I completely agree. Every single one of us that are either currently in the profession or want to come into the profession, we're each bringing our unique perspective, our unique lived experiences and personality into the field, and all of it is welcome.
Yeah, and I think just to add on that, actually, I was just remembering what someone told me the other day. I went to a networking event recently, and I came across someone who said she wanted to be a therapist, but she was given the advice that she wouldn't be able to because she can't manage herself, or she has so much trauma, or she's not able to manage her emotions. And, I in that moment, I said, but that's what makes a really good therapist. When you've gone through your own issues and you work on that and you come out the other side, it makes you better equipped to help other people who are going through similar things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've got to dispel this myth that therapists have got it all together, that they never experience bad, that we don't come, or we haven't gone through our own stuff, and somehow we're unscathed by life. And so there's something about, I always talk about we're human first, therapist second. So actually, there is something about, if you're human, if you can build relationships, and if you've been able to work through or are working through your own stuff, you are in a really good place then to go on and become a therapist.
Yes.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, great advice there. So yeah, to anyone watching this who is either in training or wants to train as a therapist, I think there's some really good tips there to kind of get you going, because yeah, Sarah is, both of us, we're cheering you on to do it. And equally, I'm thinking, well, that's from a therapist side, that's about giving advice for therapists. What if you were able that now to speak to clients directly, or to people that were thinking about, do you know what, I'd like to access therapy, I'd like to engage in it, but I don't know where to start maybe. Again, any tips or advice on what you'd want potential clients to know, whether that's about therapy itself or about accessing therapy?
A couple of things. Number one, it's not shameful to work on yourself. It's not shameful to work on yourself. If we can absolutely want to work on ourselves spiritually, if we can go to the doctor and work on ourselves physically, then we can do the same thing mentally. It is not shameful to say, yes, I'm struggling and I need help, but I want to learn. I want to learn how to help myself so that I can help others, so that I can be there for other people. But it has to start with being there for yourself. So it's not a matter of shame. It's not a matter of feeling guilty. It's a matter of working on yourself, which is what we're here to do. I get clients coming in a lot of the time and saying, but I should be able to have this figured out. I should be able to, and these should statements, they're also a form of negative talk. Don't listen to them. Don't listen to what you should do. ask yourself, what do I need to do for myself? You know, what is going to benefit me? And through that, benefit others, the people around me, my family, my, you know, my children in the future, you know. So it's just think about your role as a person and how it starts with you. And it's not selfish to do that, you know. So equally, it's not a place of guilt and it's not a place of shame. It's a place of self-improvement. And then the second thing is, I often get clients coming into my office and just expecting a quick fix, you know, just like when you're going to the doctor, you say these are my problems, ABC, you get like a test done, you get prescribed medication, and you're well on your way to being fine. But that doesn't happen in a therapist's office. You know, in a therapist's office, you have to put in the work. This is not something we can easily fix with medicine. You can take medicine for mental health, but you got to put in the work as well, you know, so that it's sustainable, so that it's long lasting. Because that's the nature of it. If you think about spiritual health, you have to pray every day. You have to do your du'as. You have to, you know, make sure that there are certain things you're doing every day that is nurturing you spiritually. And that's the same thing with mental health. You have to do these things. It's a work in progress, you know? So I have to constantly remind them that if you're not seeing a lot of improvement, or if you're feeling frustrated, let's explore that. What is it? What's the barrier to it? Most of the time, that's the barrier.
I love the feeling of this being kind of invitational, that therapy is an invitation to look after yourself, to work on yourself for personal development and improvement and growth, as opposed to these shoulds that feel like obligation and duty and an order of what you must do. And what I'm really hearing from you today, Sarah, is this is an invitation to look after yourself and to nurture yourself in a very loving, in a very self-compassionate way. And that's beautiful.
That's perfect. Definitely.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Sarah, and thank you for sharing and kind of bringing us into your world and into your experiences of being a therapist. And I think the audience and viewers today will be particularly, as I was, interested kind of in this difference about culturally and depending geographically what country you're in, how it might feel different, how it might be delivered a bit differently. And I think that's always really useful for people to know, especially whether you're coming from a therapist point of view or from a client point of view, that therapy in one country can look different to potentially therapy in another. And I think it's really important that we find a therapist that as a client, it's to find a therapist that matches with us and we feel safe with and we feel comfortable with. And like you're saying, it's about somebody then that's going to help the therapist is going to help you to be able to nurture yourself.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point. I think we should add that as a subnote as well for anyone who's seeking therapy. If you come across a therapist who you don't click with, the first couple of sessions have not gone well, and you feel like you're left worse off than before, don't immediately discard that, oh no, therapy is not for me. It could be that therapist was not the right one for you, you know? So allow yourself to be open to finding the right therapist for you, because we're all different. Like, you know, we're all different human beings. We all have different approaches, different areas of specialty, and different cultures, you know, that inform what's happening in the therapeutic space. So allow yourself to be open to it, finding that right person who's going to help you.
Great points there to end on, Sarah. Thank you so much. And for anyone watching, if this is inspired you or prompted you to go and seek help, please check out in the description box a link through to our Muslim counselling directory. And equally, if it's inspired you to go and look into training, check out some of our other videos on our YouTube channel that talk you through the training pathways to becoming a counsellor and therapist, or a psychologist, as Sarah is. Once again, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. And I look forward to all of you joining me for a future episode of Therapist Talks. Bye for now.